What's up everyone, it's Endymion, and you're probably aware that Hollywood is kind of burning alive right now with both the Writers and Actors Guilds being officially on strike. A lot of people are confused as to why this is happening, what it means, and how it can be fixed. So while I'll be explaining all of these things, there's a few key groups you all need to know before we get started. Firstly, there's the WGA, or Writers Guild of America. This is the official group that oversees the rights of all writers across media. Second is SAG-AFTRA, or Screen Actors Guild American Federation of Television and Radio. This is the guild responsible for the rights of actors from movie stars to background talent, and believe it or not, even puppeteers are included in this guild. Then there's the big final boss Avengers level guild, which is AMPTP, or the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers. This is the guild that is controlled by all the top Hollywood executives from places like Disney, Netflix, Warner, all of it. This group basically controls everything, and the other guilds abide by and eat out of the AMPTP's hands. So now that you know all the major players, I'm going to simplify all of this for you so it's easier to understand. I'll refer to WGA as writers, SAG-AFTRA as actors, and AMPTP as studios. That way, this will all be way easier to explain. And that way I don't have to say AMPTP a million times. Also, I'll be using game footage in the background so you're not staring at still images too often. Anyway, let's begin. So basically this all started because every 3 years the writers and the studios have a manual meeting where they all sit down and discuss the rights and benefits of the writers. If the deal during this meeting doesn't go through, that's when a strike happens. So why are the writers on strike? Essentially, the studios have found a loophole when it comes to residuals, when it comes to content, and then there's also AI, but I'll get more into that part later. Basically, whenever a writer writes a show, the studio releases the show, and when that show goes live on network television, ads are placed in the form of commercials. And then the studios make money from these ads being placed during the shows and during reruns, which means more ads are played, and that leads to more money. So the way it used to work was that writers would get a check from a certain portion of the ad revenue generated when the show they wrote plays on TV. Of course, all of this went out of whack once streaming came into existence. Because now when you watch Netflix or Amazon Prime, there's not exactly ads being played in between episodes, you just kind of watch it and go. However, because of this change, the writers don't get the same treatment from ads like they did on TV back in the day. To put this into perspective, let's look at the show Abbott's Elementary. One of the show's writers is Brittany Nichols, and she explains it like this. When Abbott Elementary runs on ABC, which is your basic TV network, repeated viewings of that show's episodes generate large amounts of ad revenue. So in this scenario, the writers would make a good chunk on residuals. However, Abbott Elementary also airs on Hulu and is licensed out to places like Disney+. Because the show is available for more people to watch, but ads aren't being used for payment, but instead subscriptions are, the writers make less. How much less, you might be asking? Well, in Abbott Elementary's case, writers would be paid residuals of around $14,000 on average. But when the show is streamed, the writers make only $700 on average from residuals, which is, yeah, a huge difference. And the problem here is that since streaming services use subscriptions to make money, this is effectively a loophole that allows the studios to make a ton of money without having to pay out nearly as much to the writers. Another problem is what the writers call mini rooms. The usual way shows are made are when a bunch of writers are brought into a writer's room, for lack of a better word, and they write the blueprint for the show, and they're heavily involved in the process. But in order to cut costs, studios have been taking that same concept but reducing it dramatically into what's called a mini room, which is probably the same size room, I'm guessing, just way less people being involved and, writing it. Anyway, the writers in this mini room are micromanaged by the studios to make scripts, but because it's so heavily controlled by studios, the writers are paid less and have to work even harder. Then of course you have AI, where studios want to use stuff like ChatGPT to auto-generate scripts on the various IPs that they own. This is clearly one of the largest threats to human-made media, because why would a studio pay a room of writers to make something when they could just tell ChatGPT, hey, I want a script about Charlie Brown and friends, and I want it done to mimic the style of the Stranger Things script. ChatGPT goes, you got it boss, and voila, you got your script. And not only does this essentially cut out thousands of writers from paid work, these studios would then take these AI-generated scripts and maybe hire a writer or two to proofread these scripts and make little changes here and there to ensure it's good enough to go for production. And while one or two writers might get work, since there would be literal thousands of writers clamoring for a job, it's very likely this future scenario would be paying the writers that do work on scripts pennies in comparison. And if a writer acts up, they can just blacklist them and get the next one in line until that one eventually croaks and dies. And to show you how unfairly writers are being compensated in this current streaming era, the writer of Daredevil's episode in She-Hulk, whose name is Cody Ziegler, was paid $396 in residuals for that episode since it aired last year. Not even $1,000 for a Marvel Disney show, which is crazy. Then of course you have one of the big higher-ups in the form of Bob Iger, who runs Disney. Iger recently was quoted saying that writers and actors are not being realistic when it comes to their demands of this strike. Iger said, quote, "It's very disturbing to me. We've talked about disruptive forces on this business and all the challenges we're facing. The recovery from COVID, which is ongoing, it's not completely back. This is the worst time in the world to add to that disruption. I understand any labor organization's desire to work on behalf of its members to get the most compensations and be compensated fairly based on the value that they deliver. We managed as an industry to negotiate a very good deal with the Directors Guild that reflects the value that the directors contribute to this great business. We wanted to do the same thing with the writers, and we'd like to do the same thing with the actors. There is a level of expectation that they have that is just not realistic. And they are adding to the set of the challenges that this business is already facing that is quite frankly very disruptive. While I respect the rights of the unions to get as much as they possibly can in compensation for their people, they must be realistic about the business environment and what this business can deliver. It will have a very damaging effect on the whole business, and unfortunately there's huge collateral damage in the industry to people who are supportive services, and I could go on and on. It will affect the economy of different regions even because of the sheer size of the business. It's a shame. It is really a shame." End quote. It's kind of tone deaf coming from Iger since the dude makes around $27 million a year on average running Disney. Yet he thinks writers and actors should get back to work so he can enjoy his millions that they generate for him. Iger will also run Disney until at least 2026. And a lot of the problems with content being less than stellar quality at Disney anyway comes directly from his vision, as he was the guy who signed off on the making of projects like She-Hulk or movies like Solo or Strange World. Even Adam Conover, who you might know from Adam Ruins Everything, had this to say while participating in the strike. So watch.
So yesterday, some studio executives told the press that they were planning on waiting out the Writers Guild until October, when writers will lose our apartments and homes and become homeless, and then be forced to come back to the table and take a bad deal. Now, first of all, I cannot believe that they said this. They took the mask off. They told on themselves bigger than anyone I have ever seen. But also, they are dead fucking wrong, because writers are in this for the long haul. We have a strike fund that we use to support other writers who are on hard times. We are raising money for crew members and other people affected by the strike. And most importantly, we know that if we do not get a fair deal, we will not have jobs to go back to. So we are not going to leave this picket line. We are going to keep withholding our labor until the companies come back to the table and make a fair deal. And they're going to do that. You know why? Because they need us. Every dollar they make begins with us. So they are not starving us out. We are starving them out. And until they come back to the table, there will be no writing.
Then, of course, you have the other big elephant in the room, which is that a lot of what's being made prior to this strike has varied wildly in terms of quality. I think it's safe to say that the last few years have had the quality of projects go from great to borderline dog water at best. Shows like She-Hulk or Netflix's Cleopatra were made by these very same writers who want fair compensation. But the reality is that while yes, they do deserve rights, at the same time the quality of the media these writers are making isn't exactly great either. So when you see a writer for She-Hulk make $400, it might seem insane. But then you actually look at She-Hulk and go, well, that show was garbage, so it's not that surprising. We're in this weird middle ground where the writers want more compensation for their work, but the reality is that a lot of the writing they're doing is just full of woke, nonsensical virtue signaling that fails to garner an audience. It's why you're seeing companies remove content from streaming services. This is yet another loophole in the streaming model. where companies remove a show and because the show no longer exists on official platforms, all the writers involved get no more money from it. And while that does suck for the writers, you have to also raise the unpopular question, which is that, why should they be compensated when they keep producing shit shows that nobody watches? The writers of Willow were angry that their show died and got removed mere months after release, as did the writers of that Grease spin-off show about the Pink Ladies, but both of these shows did so poorly with audiences and reviews that the studios opted to remove them, then continue to pay dwindling residuals for terrible work. While of course this comparison isn't fair across the board since there are plenty of shows that are good that do reach audiences. Shows like House of the Dragon or The Bear, for example, but even then the writers of some of your favorite shows are also getting screwed because of this. So we're in this weird place where the studios won't budge because they don't want to pay mediocre or borderline terrible writers for their shit work, but it also screws over the actual good writers too. Then of course you have the Actors Guild, which also went on strike. Their issue has to do with things like healthcare and AI. Matt Damon spoke out about this at a press junket on Oppenheimer, so watch.
Ben and I just started this little independent studio, and we're 3.5 movies in. We're shut down on one of them right now. We're just waiting for everything to resolve. So, and it's brutal for our sister unions. It's brutal for IATSE. You know what I mean? It's like, and it's going to be tough for the actor, for 160,000 actors. So nobody wants a work stoppage, but if our leadership is saying that the deal isn't fair, then we gotta hold strong till we get a deal that's fair for working actors. It's the difference between having health care and not for a lot of actors, and we got to do what's right by them.
You might be thinking health care for movie stars, but again, the Actor Guild encompasses all actors, even the background actors, stunt doubles, all of that. So naturally, health insurance for people who don't make millions is something worth fighting for. Then of course there's AI for actors, where studios are pushing for the use of AI when it comes to future projects. Basically, the issue here is that studios want to pay an actor, let's say Matt Damon again in this case, a fee that is equivalent to 1 day of work for their likeness and voice, and then that's it. The studios don't want to pay any residuals or whatever on any future use of that actor's face or voice in the future. So you could see Chris Evans as Captain America 50 years from now in his prime, but Disney would pocket all the money and Evans' family or estate wouldn't see a dime, which is super screwed up in my opinion. We're reaching a breaking point here where the studios are basically using their power to put writers, actors, honestly everybody in such a stranglehold that you either do things their way or you just cease to exist within the industry. The strike is also coming at a weird time since because of it, the cast of Oppenheimer aren't legally allowed to attend their own premiere and take questions from the press, since it would go against the legal constraints of the actors' strike. And allegedly, the cast of Oppenheimer have already left any future premiere events and will join the strike now officially. So ultimately where we stand right now is that the writers and actors are not legally allowed to work on anything and the studios are refusing to budge even an inch. And it's gotten so nuclear bad that studios are allegedly ready to wait out the strikes until the people striking run out of money and lose their homes and apartments due to not working and paying bills. Mind you, the last time Hollywood had a strike, it cost the industry around $2 billion in profit. This one, however, is likely going to cost so much more. And if we use 2018 Hollywood numbers, the studios made roughly $28 billion in revenue that year. So in comparison, if you're wondering how much the writers and such wanted in residuals from that $28 billion, it would roughly come to around $600 million, or barely not even $1 billion of the $28 billion, and even then, they wouldn't budge. So as of right now, that's where we're at. Hollywood is paying dearly for their mistakes and greed, writers of both the woke and actually talented variety are being screwed, and actors are fighting for their own existences to not be monetized for the rest of time. And the studios at the very top are willing to wait until everything burns instead of giving in to demands. We truly do live in a weird time, my friends, but let me know what you think as always in the comments below. What should happen? Should writers get what they want? Or is it their fault for writing shit content for as long as they have that it's actually their fault? Let me know. Subscribe for more in the future, like the video, have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.